Awesome. Welcome to CIS. Welcome to another ERIE event, the first of our 2015 fall semester. So we're pretty excited about that. We're especially excited because today we are collaborating with the 920 Coalition. And I don't know how many people are here. How many people are here because of the 920 Coalition or have heard about it through that? Okay, a few people. Great, fantastic. So for those of you who don't know, 920 Coalition is a day of celebration for the potentials of psilocybin mushrooms. This was created, I think, I'm not sure exactly where. Some students in the East Coast decided it would be a great idea to come together and celebrate, similar to how 420 is celebrated for cannabis, and it was a sort of a rallying point for people to come together. Their idea was to do the same thing for mushrooms and have it be 920. I personally think 923 or solstice, equinox would have been a better time, but I'm okay with 920. It looks like 420. It makes sense from a marketing perspective. So, but anyway, it's been really great. There's been quite a few organizations that have joined in. An organization in Maine. There was an awesome conference in Cleveland. Kai Wingo does work out there with mushrooms. It's really amazing. Detroit has some great events out there. LA, there's some great events at UC Davis. SSDP has been running things all over the U.S. as well. Phoenix, University of Texas, Austin, quite a few places. So it's been pretty exciting to see all these different organizations across the U.S. popping up and across the world, actually. And it just goes to show you that there are quite a few more people involved in this than we might think offhand. So it's really nice to be able to participate this and be able to give the San Francisco showing. I know that Oliver's movie was showing just yesterday on 920 in Berkeley at the Alchemy Cafe, right? Yeah. So if you haven't seen that, that's Little Saints. I'm doing a little promo for him there. And tonight we're going to be talking on different types of conversations. A lot of the other conversations, we're dealing with some of the work that's being done in the biomedical institutions. As you know, if you've come to CIS before, we're a little bit more into transpersonal ideas and a little bit more into sort of the fringe elements of consciousness. So you'll find some really fascinating conversations today. For those of you, how many people have not been to an ERIE event before? Okay. Wow, awesome. All right, well, welcome. It's always interesting that we have about 50-50 people that have been here before and people that haven't, so welcome to all that haven't. This is a great community of people. Please meet your neighbor and find out who's next to you. There's a lot of wonderful people around. ERIE is a student organization here at CIS. It stands for Entheogenic Research, Integration, and Education. We've been working for about 4 years now, and one of our main ideas is to create educational events to gather community and have people come to talk about these wonderful potentials of these medicines. The second thing that's really important for us is the idea of integration. How do we help people bring their insights back and have them apply it to daily life? This could be a transpersonal insight, it could be a daily life insight, but how can we bring these experiences back and actually learn from them and not go through what's called spiritual bypassing, where we keep looking for the next experience without ever grounding the one previously. So that's something we're really working on, and we will continue to work on once we have our community center, which we're developing now. We actually just, maybe about a month ago, got our 501c3 status, so that's pretty exciting for us. So thank you, yeah. So now I guess this is ERIE's student chapter, and ERIE 501c3 exists out there in the world, so that's pretty exciting, and it's for our next steps. So if you have any volunteer skills or spots that you want to donate or cash, we're always open to all that as well. So, but it's really great to be here, and I'm really happy. Today we have 3 different speakers. I'll be speaking second. We have Jahan speaking first, and Dr. Natalie will be following it up. I'm really excited to be able to speak with this panel of speakers as well, because they've all been doing really amazing work, and it's an honor to be with them. Jahan is going to be speaking with us first, and I know that he was just recently was able to do some traveling in Europe. I think you just graduated here, right? You just got your master's? Still working on dissertation. That's me too. That's a long process, right? And he's coming here, and he's been really excited about sort of this stoned ape theory. So I'm sure many of you know about Terence Mckenna's work and sort of the evolution of consciousness through ingestion of materials in the environment. So he's going to look a little bit about that, look at past evolution of consciousness and potentials of the future. It's been really great. He's in the PCC department here, which is the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness department, and he's an amazing philosopher. So it's going to be really exciting to hear what you have to say. The way the day is going to be set up, we'll have 20-minute talks for each person. We'll save the question and answers till the end. I'll be speaking, Jahan, myself, and Natalie, and then after that we'll do a panel. So we'll have a little break before the panel. You can have a chance to get a bathroom break or whatever, and then come back and ask your questions then. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jahan and his talk, which is Catalysts of a New Worldview, Psychedelic Mushrooms as Evolutionary Agents of the Past and Future.
Hi, everyone. Hey. Hi. My name is Jahan Khamsehzadeh. I'll be talking about something that's very personally important to me, and I personally think is probably the most important topic we could be talking about anywhere in the world, but most people lack the context in which to place it in. The talk will take the same trajectory that my personal development has taken. First, showing a strong transformational experience occurring through mushrooms, then mushrooms taking a back seat while we focus on cosmological and psychological evolution, and then bringing mushrooms back as the stars at play once the stage has been set. And that this perhaps might be the whole trajectory that the human race as a whole has taken. That perhaps our hominid ancestors had a relationship with mushrooms, helped create us as who we are, then we left that behind, moved forward and culturally and technologically developed, and now we're moving back to the awareness of our origins through a new type of consciousness renaissance. Yeah. So at the year when I was 18 years old, I had the most transformative, important experience of my life. You know, I was an atheist. I struggled a lot with anxiety, suicidal tendencies, existential despair. And right after I graduated high school, I took a dose of mushrooms and went to a Tool concert. Totally life changed there. The experience was more of kind of like a psychological death. You know, it felt like I was dying and I was too curious. I kind of went along with the process, even though I had no context of what was occurring. Time completely stopped. And the experience with them was just of a complete rapid expansion. A voice entered my consciousness that said, like, Jahan, you know, and my reply was, you know, is this real? Is this God? And the voice said, yes, you know, and just broke down in tears because I felt like what was happening was something my soul had always been waiting for, but I didn't know I even wanted. And in this experience, I experienced a sense of like eternal timelessness that had existed before the Big Bang, that exists continually after death. That this was something that was always subtly happening in our awareness, but we were just not sensitive enough to see. So from then on, it's kind of like entered the next day. It's a radically new paradigm that never went away, that we live in a synchronistic cosmos, that everything's kind of intelligently orchestrated, that we're in this energetic flow with each other in the environment. And just how there could be an experience of trauma in one's life that stunts oneself, that creates a contraction that moves forward in one's life forever. You know, that might be hard to heal. So can a really strong healing experience lift oneself out of the fog and create ripples of wholeness and healing throughout the rest of one's life and everyone else who comes in contact. So after that experience, I went online, spent weeks researching online to like, what was this thing I experienced? I had no context for it. I came across the work of Gordon Wasson. If I talk really fast, it's because I have a lot to share in a small amount of time. So, who claimed that we had finally found, you know, the connection to God, you know, and he was saying it's Amanita muscaria. Terence Mckenna would later say with a lot of evidence that it was a psilocybin mushroom. And I remember I was just wanting to scream from the mountain tops that we found it. We found what we always wanted, but didn't know, you know, like didn't know we wanted. I also knew the context I lived in at the time. There was like a postmodern paradigm in which there were so many voices clamoring for attention, religious voices, you know, philosophical voices, opinion voices, and then my opinion didn't really matter. There wasn't much difference in value, you know. So I kept that experience to myself for 7 years. You know, I thought about it all day long for the first 3 years. I thought about it every day for the next 7 years, and still didn't have an outlet for it. So this picture up here I drew when I was 18 years old after that experience. The first class I took in college was a class called God, Mind, and Matter. It was a philosophy class, and I did a presentation on psychedelics, and this is, you know, part of the presentation then. So when at first I felt like on fire after the experience, I went into college and I registered as a neuroscience major because I wanted to work with entheogens, work my way up and do research. But that's not what karma had in store for me. I took a physics course, and the teacher was like, if you want to understand the mysteries of the universe, you have to know physics. And I was just like, I'm on board. And so I studied under this guy for 3 years. I was a physics and math major for a while, but all the time wanting to study consciousness. And it became clear 3 years in that that's not where physics was going, as much as I know many of us would like it to. I let that go, majored in philosophy, minored in physics and psychology, finally when I got the master's in consciousness, and now I'm here working on a PhD in philosophy, cosmology, consciousness. Yeah. So throughout a lot of this time, especially I was living in Tucson, Arizona, I didn't have a lot of friends that were into the same things I did, so I found my outlet or kind of affirmation through books, music, people like Tool, and then art, like Alex Trey, and one of them was a comedian, Bill Hicks, who had a very similar experience. I'll share with you. 3 weeks ago, two of my friends and I went to a ranch in Fredericksburg, Texas, and took what Terrence McKenna calls a heroic dose. 5 dried grams. Let me tell you, our third eye was squeegeed quite cleanly. Wow. And I'm glad they're against the law, because you know what happened when I took them? I laid in a field of green grass for 4 hours going, my God, I love everything. The heavens parted. God looked down and rained gifts of forgiveness onto my being, healing me on every level, psychically, physically, emotionally. And we realized our true spirit is, our true nature is spirit, not body. That we're eternal beings and God love is unconditional, and there's nothing we can ever do to change that. It is only our illusion that we are separate from God or that we are alone. In fact, the reality is we are one with God and He loves us. Now, if that isn't a hazard to this country, what's going to happen to the arms industry when we realize we're all one? You can see why the government is cracking down this idea of experiencing unconditional love. And this just goes to show there's a lot of people that have these experiences, many in this room. And that this is in pure contrast to the materialistic paradigm happening right now in our society. And it's important to know because these kind of experiences only really make sense when we start to see that consciousness is foundational in the very cosmos that we live in at the very beginning. So the reductionist, materialist predominant view, I spend a lot of time in physics and in science, it starts to fall apart quite, just when you think about it rationally, like how did consciousness come out of something material? Why it's not as a byproduct? How does something experiential come out of something physical? It doesn't start to make sense. The only thing that starts to begin to make sense is consciousness was there since the very beginning. From the Big Bang, it's been an evolutionary process of expansion. One way to see this is that consciousness deepens, matter complexifies. Or vice versa, as matter complexifies, consciousness deepens. There's a process we move through from atoms to molecules to cells to higher level organisms, and all this time there's a greater sense of expansion of awareness taking place. So I spent the last good 5 years a lot of us have this intuition that there's a new paradigm emerging, there's a new worldview emerging. We see it in the text, we see it in the art, we see it in our conversations. And I was just like, well, this needs to be articulated. This needs to be defined. And as soon as I had the idea, I immediately took out a piece of paper and I was like, so what are the tenets? What are the principles? Wrote them down, and 5 years later, they're still the same, and I've worked a lot on expanding them. I was open to changing them, but they still fit. And this is that, first, we live in a holistic universe, a unified gestalt. Reality is non-reducible to its parts. It is systemic and therefore relational and can be seen as a whole. Each member connects to each other member, forming an interconnected structure. Non-reducible properties emerge from relational interactions with the whole. 2, it is experiential. Reality is experience-centered. The universe includes interiority along with matter. This is in contrast to the purely physical world of modernity. 3, it evolves. The universe progresses. It evolves through chartable stages. As consciousness deepens, matter becomes more complex. 4, it's nested. The universe embodies as a nested structure. It embeds itself within itself. Reality evolves through layers, levels, realms, both psychically and physically. We live in a hierarchical existence. The universe has interior depth and external complexity. Each level contains specific perspectives with relative truths. 5, it is self-organizing. The universe inherently contains an organizing intelligence. Synchronicity moves the cosmos to its greater levels of coherence, leading towards greater levels of wholeness and transcendence. Holistic properties emerge out of the dynamic self-organizational processes, bringing about greater levels of wholeness or unfoldment. So we can see that mushrooms actually, this is the kind of experience we see on them, but also mushrooms break us out of this material paradigm. Once we see that in our mushroom experience, there's almost greater levels of organization, of coherence happening in our experience in normal life. We start to leave this whole paradigm behind. And these tenets could be seen in, well, it's hard to see here, but there's a list of many authors, and I only wanted to put up the ones there who I knew personally in terms of I've read a whole book of them and feel intimate with. Some of the ones you might know could be Fitjof Capra, who pretty much wrote the book on living systems. Stan Grof, self-organizing experiential patterns nested inside a larger archetypal cosmos. You have Jeremy Rifkin, Rupert Sheldrake's evolution occurring through a process of morphic experiential fields. Brian Swinburne tarnished the self-organizing synchronistic cosmos in which beings participate in larger orders of reality. You have Alfred Whitehead and Ken Wilber. And all these authors, you're going to see these same patterns occurring. And I'm going to far say that almost any type of new paradigm thinker, systems thinker, new science thinker, new kind of philosophies that we're going to resonate with, you're going to see these same patterns emerge. So to break it down, this will make sense when we get more into the mushrooms and like I said, taking a back step for a moment, that the ultimate archetypal patterns, if you can imagine, is like a universe of blankness, and the quarks come into existence, and then electrons, protons, neutrons, it comes together and form atoms, right? So there's the whole idea that there's parts and wholes interacting, and we're part of that evolutionary play. But the first process that occurs is a sense of autonomy. First, there's a sense of self. There's a beingness, there's an I-ness, there's something that comes to existence that is an individual, an atom. The next thing that happens is it relates with other atoms. It's a second force. There's a relationship occurring. I call it communion, autonomy, the communion. We experience that through gravity, magnetism, and emotionally through love, affection. There's a type of bonding that all of creation goes through, a type of interconnectivity. After that, these parts come together and form larger wholes. These communities come together and form a higher being. I call that transcendence. We can emotionally experience that as joy, as a feeling of something larger. So holding this perspective of seeing these actions as inherent and foundational dynamics of the cosmos, then all holistic psychic physical parts and wholes are experiential beings nested inside of and co-creating a larger sentient entity. Right? This atoms, molecules, cells moving forward. So if you can imagine for a moment that you're a cell, all right? And what you're doing is going around your environment, feeling your way through and coming into contact with other chemicals. Right? And we're still using that pattern today. We take in oxygen, we take in food, we take in pheromones. That's what we're doing. Imagine you move into some of these chemicals and they bring an expanded state, a novelty, something new. Now there would be no laws, no judgments, no shame, nothing to stop the self from continually doing that. That would keep happening and it would become part of the evolutionary process. The idea then is that that's perhaps what our hominid ancestors did. As far as I know, Terence Mckenna is the first one that put forward that we are an ape with a symbiotic relationship to the mushroom. So this current, it looks like you guys can't even see it here, right? Well, it turns out that a lot of his stages of mushroom growth happen to align with this idea of autonomy, communion, and transcendence. He writes, at first, the low-level usage of effects of psilocybin that Fisher found, whom researched psilocybin in 1970, noted that small amounts of psilocybin consumed with no awareness of its psychoactivity, while in general act of browsing for food, and perhaps later consumed consciously, impart a noticeable increase in the visual acuity, especially edge detection. So at low-level doses, it would have held our sense of self-preservation early on, as our hominid ancestors. Number 2, communion. Because psilocybin is a stimulant of the central nervous system, when taken in slightly higher doses, it tends to trigger restlessness and sexual arousal. Thus, the second level of usage by increasing instances of copulation. The mushroom directly favored human reproduction. Communion. Right? 3. Transcendence. Certainly at the third and highest level of usage, religious concerns would be at the forefront of the tribe's consciousness, simply because of the power and strangeness of the experience itself. The boundary dissolving hallucinogen using tribal groups to community bonding and to group sexual activities would promote gene production, higher birth rates, and communal sense of responsibility for the group offspring. So you can see psilocybin early on would have helped foster, would have helped and encourage all these cosmic principles of evolution. And more importantly, right now, that makes more social sense. We know chronologically that shamanism predecessed all the religions as far as we know. So across the land, in these shamanic cultures would use psilocybin mushrooms and other plant medicines to enter into altered states. And so the claim can easily be made there, which is an important point, that mushrooms perhaps were the original inspiration for all religions. So let's put these two together. What's a mystical experience and mushroom experience kind of like? So we can ask Abraham Maslow, who's kind of seen as the father of peak experiences in psychology. So this is how he defines peak experiences. The feeling of simultaneously more powerful and also more helpless than ever before. The feeling of ecstasy and wonder and awe. And the loss of placement of time and space. Kind of starts to sound like a psychedelic experience. Finally, the conviction that something extremely important and valuable had happened, so that the subject was to some extent transformed and strengthened, even in his daily life by such experiences. These are rare, mystical, exciting, and deeply moving and exhilarating. Any person in one of these peak experiences also temporarily takes on the traits, characteristics of what I found as self-actualizing individuals. So we begin to see these states of awareness start to mimic the stages of personal growth. And we've come to the point in our technology where we no longer have to biologically evolve. Not so much, right? Our needs are being met. We don't have to adapt to it. We can get food when we want. This summer, I said, like, I went to Europe. I went online, saved some money, went online, bought plane tickets, showed up to the airport, and went and saw 9 countries in 35 days. I don't need to grow wings. You know, our bodies have come to the point where it no longer needs to adapt the way it has before, but consciousness is still changing. Psychology, we're still developing. And you can see in his hierarchy of growth that it also follows these 3 traits of evolution. At the bottom, for those are familiar with this hierarchy, is the physiological needs, you know, food, water, air, you know, and then you have this, security and safety. So all these are self-preservation. Once those needs are met, we instinctually move on to love and belonging, to connect with others. Once that needs are met, we try to instinctually create a larger sense of self, self-esteem and self-transcendence, right? So these are not only psychological forces for humanity, but move through the entire animal kingdom and back through our evolutionary history. And evolution is still continuing. There's a lot of models of psychological development. Some of my favorite are Claire Gray's model of spiral dynamics, who at the top level, you begin to see reality as an organism in which we are interacting with. It's like level 8 of growth, but at the level 5th of growth, you kind of have what's the modern culture in terms of capitalism, of hyper-rationality, of scientism that's kind of a dogmatic scientism. You can see in Jeremy Rifkin's work of kind of evolution and human culture moving towards an empathic brace. And empathy is, again, something that psilocybin helps foster. You see even Ken Wilberworth, probably my favorite philosopher, who's taken over 200 models of psychological development and found patterns that arise in cross-culture in development, that we first move from an egocentric point of view, an identity with self, to an identity with a tribe or a culture, a group of people, or a nation, and then that expands to identity with all humans, then all life, and then the world itself, and then finally you become cosmocentric, identify with the universe in which you are like more a vessel for like cosmic energy, right? And again, psilocybin brings us through all these through higher degrees of empathy, of seeing oneself in another, but then interconnecting with a larger whole. So this is written from Simon Powell, from the Magic Mushroom Explorer, Psilocybin in the Awakening Earth. And he seemed to be, for most of his adult life, was an activist for psilocybin. The mushroom affords us a more healthy relationship with the biosphere and with one another, 2 issues that ought to rate highly in any personal growth endeavor. These mushrooms are really a catalyst that can galvanize new ways of thinking and feeling and can help us reattune with the human race into harmony with the larger biospherical environment. If this sounds grandiose, then it's because the mushroom experience is so utterly compelling. So when we can begin to see the natural occurrence of psilocybin as part of the Earth's homeostasis, you know, anybody that's self-aware right now or looking at the bigger picture knows that the ecological crisis is the biggest concern of our generation, probably the generation that follows. And that nature perhaps built in a natural mechanism for self-preservation, of transmuting its consciousness with ours in terms of, well, Terence McKenna called it an interspecies pheromone. The same way ants use chemicals to communicate with one another and plants do with each other. This is interspecies communication between us and the nature, capital N, or the plant world in the larger whole. So the great thing is nature created a way for us to intersubjectively connect with each other and the whole. And it might be very different and easier than our culture has thought. When we begin to see nature as a living entity of which we are ourselves a part of, then we begin to see mushrooms as mediums of experiential information communicated between us and the larger whole. Nothing is stronger or more valuable than an authentic spiritual experience, and magic mushrooms help cause them. And in these eternal states, one can feel a new level of wholeness for the first time and see who we really are. Our human money and status pales in comparison to this experience. If larger consumer culture knew the power of these mushrooms, they would be the most expensive things in the world, since only psychedelics give us such a radical, shift in experience. And yet the mushrooms would transform the very culture that tried to subdue and sell them. No one can monopolize the telephone from God. The plants would graciously give it to us. So where are we moving forward in the future? We're no longer in the same context of our hominid ancestors or our tribal, ancient relatives. Technologically, we have a lot more available, and there's a lot of people happening. I think the most fascinating thing happening right now is the transformative festivals that create a large container for, Lightning in a Bottle had 28,000 people this year, and the Burning Man about 70,000. And it creates a safe space, mostly a safe space for a lot of people to get together and do these pre-modern rituals of dancing all night, taking medicines, going off in solo journeys. And when you're there, I'm constantly seeing people around me have the most important experiences of their lives, just breaking down and having something utterly unprecedented from what they had felt before. And these technologies, medicine technologies, weren't so available to the generations that preceded us in our culture. So I think we're heading radically somewhere new. And we still have the ceremonies, of the past we can go to. Psychedelic psychotherapy is emerging. There's many ways we could take this. But I think, there's a collective vision happening that I definitely feel kind of open to, that we kind of need to create more of a permanent settlement where we can go and experience these things, like a resort we can go tap into and come back to. And legality is an issue, but I'm hoping if we begin to see that perhaps we do have an ancient relationship with the mushroom that moves to legality. And if it comes to pass that if they were a part of our past, studying evolution, nothing makes sense of why the human hominids quickly evolved to an unprecedented rate of anything before it. And it seems to be, if there's something that expanded our consciousness, it kind of fits in that arena. If this is true, if we redefine what it means to be a human, and if it became more legal in a culture, people are curious about, is this our evolutionary past, and took it more, and it opened a kind of a dialogue between us and nature, us and reality. I can't even imagine where we would go. For those that have taken psilocybin, it seems to be what comes up is beyond one's personal imagination, but there is a flow, there is an adventure, there's a kind of script, an unfolding that one is a part of. And I think if we create the right kind of support, safety supports in our culture, I don't know where we'd go with it, but it'd be the right place. So, thank you.